Everyone's using the wrong visual settings. I'll show you how to access hidden settings, why you shouldn't cap your frame rate, and explain all the best options for this season. The first thing to note is that DX12 now gives both higher FPS and lower input lag, but only when looking into Megacity. Since Megacity was built intentionally to take advantage of Unreal Engine's new Nanite and Lumen features, it makes sense that it was best optimized for DX12. But everywhere else on the map and in creative, it's the exact opposite, where performance mode by far gives the best results. However, performance mode actually runs DX11 on the back end, it just uses lower graphics to improve performance. This means even though performance mode hides most of the DX11 settings, they still apply to your game. For example, if you turn on or off Reflex low latency then swap to performance mode, you can see in the latency stats that whatever settings you had from DX11 still apply to performance mode. So we'll switch back to performance mode at the end, but when changing all your settings you want to be on DX11. Starting from the bottom, if you have the Reflex low latency option, you want to turn it to on plus boost. Normally, your CPU creates frames and sends them to a render queue that your GPU renders from. When the render queue gets backed up, this causes a delay between when the frame was created to when it gets shown to your screen. Reflex low latency keeps the queue clear so that there's less latency. The plus boost part just keeps your GPU running at full speed at all times. Same as when you turn power management mode to maximum performance in the NVIDIA control panel. Latency markers and show FPS are up to you if you want to see that information, but GPU crash debugging should be off since it reduces performance. Now in the graphics quality section, everything here should be in the lowest setting possible except 3D resolution and view distance. View distance does not change how far you can see people, the render distance for players is always 275 meters. But it does change how far away you'll render builds and loot. You can see builds from super far away even on near, but it gets even further the more you turn it up. So you want to keep it low for that, but when you're on near, you can't see loot until you're 35 meters away from it unless you ping it. So it's beneficial to turn view distance up to medium or far so that you can see loot when gliding in and see what's in loot piles during late game. Turning 3D resolution down is the same thing as playing on 720p or 480p. It looks pretty bad though, so turn this down only if you can't get a stable frame rate any other way. Going up to the graphics section, this is entirely subjective. Not only because we see differently, but we all have different monitors with different brightnesses, color presets, etc. So the only thing I can say for sure is motion blur needs to be off. Now for the rest of the settings, we can swap back to performance mode and restart Fortnite. First, you want to make sure you're on full screen. Not windowed full screen, exclusive full screen. This is because all programs by default use the Windows compositor, which adds an extra buffer so that when you swap between programs, the screen doesn't flicker. Full screen mode turns that buffer off, which is why it gets you lower latency, but your screen goes black for a second if you tab out. For your resolution, it should be whatever your monitor's native resolution is. I don't recommend any stretch resolutions. I explained it in detail in a separate video, but basically it's because it always lessens your field of view. VSync also has to be off because it's literally designed to add input lag. Now, there are a few reasons people give for capping frame rate, but there are even more misconceptions around it. The main things frame rate caps aim to do is either lower input latency or make FPS more stable, preventing stutters. The reason it works is because when your GPU is at maximum load, the render queue gets backed up so the GPU is constantly rendering old frames, meaning you have high input latency. So capping your FPS means the GPU isn't at maximum load and doesn't get backed up, so the render queue stays clear, meaning lower input latency. But NVIDIA's Reflex low latency was designed specifically to fix this problem and keep the render queue clear even when the GPU is at maximum load. Because of this, you can run your maximum FPS without backing up the render queue, allowing for the lowest possible latency. It's a really good technology, so if you have the Reflex low latency option, use it and uncap your FPS. If you don't have this option, then capping your frame rate to your monitor's refresh rate will be the best option. The only other new option now that we're on performance mode is meshes. I've already went in depth on the differences in an old video, but basically high and low meshes have the same input latency, but low meshes give a bit more FPS and less visual clutter at the cost of not being able to see through builds. There are also other settings that aren't in the video tab, but still reduce your FPS. Like the setting in the second tab called high quality replays. If you leave it on, it'll reduce your performance to supposedly improve replays, but the replays are still glitchy anyway, so I don't think it's worth the trade-off. In the game UI tab, there are a bunch more settings that don't necessarily impact FPS, but take off a bunch of clutter from the screen so you can see easier. The ones that you obviously need on are the reticle, player health, resources, minimap, quick bar, target info, and elimination feed. Everything else should be off except a few that are optional. Net debug stats shows you your ping, and reticle ammo indicator shows next to your reticle how many bullets are left in your weapon. If you turn it off, you can still see it at the bottom right, so it's up to you whether or not you want to see it. And I find the default HUD scale to be way too big, so I turn it down to 75, but I mean hey, if you need to sniff your monitor to see, then do you. If you do turn the HUD scale down though, it makes the damage number small as well, so turn that back up to compensate. I also prefer damage numbers to be on list instead of cumulative. Cumulative makes it easier to see how much damage you've done, but harder to tell how much health they have left. Like here, you know you did 76 damage, but how much of that was white health? Unless you paid attention to exactly when the number changed color, you wouldn't know. It actually only did 38 white health, but it looks like 76. With the list option, you can always see exactly how much white health you hit for, and reticle damage feedback doesn't give you any additional useful information, so turn it off. You don't need to see whether or not you hit a headshot, you just need to know how much damage you dealt. And that's everything there is for visual settings. If you're interested in other settings like edit on release or keybinds, check out those videos on screen. If not, you can subscribe to see future uploads. Farewell!